Brother Gallagher mentioned in his prayer about the talent that our speaker has, and certainly he is very knowledgeable dealing with God's Word. He has great talent in writing and putting that knowledge down and exposing error and standing for truth. And he is one who we care about greatly. He told me this morning that it feels like there's some people in his back that are having a sword fight.
7 devils.
7 devils, he said. So he's in a lot of pain, and we appreciate him for being here. He is at Mount Juliet, Tennessee, and has been there for many years. He has his PhD degree from Vanderbilt, so he is well educated. He's written a great deal, numerous books. He brought one book with him, and it was gone so quickly. I think 9 copies that he brought or something, that was gone real quickly, but I think he has some more at home, so if you'd like one of those, you can certainly get one. And it deals with liberalism, which is our subject today at this hour. At this time, it's dealing with liberalism's effect on the home, because it has had its effect upon the home within our society and is continuing to. And we need to be knowledgeable of that and how it is working and what it does to us so that we can avoid it and we can fight against it. I know that he's going to present a great lesson on this subject for us.
Thank you very kindly, Brother Michael. I appreciate those good words, kind words that you've said. And I'll try to live up to that expectation which inheres in that introduction. You know, I have such good, precious memories of being here at Bellview in days gone by. And I don't remember just exactly how many lectureships it's been my pleasure to participate in as a speaker, but I do recall some of those very pleasant days gone by. I'd like to express my gratitude to the good ladies who provided the excellent meals. Those have been par excellent in my thinking, and I want you to know that I appreciate that far more than I'll be able to express to you. I've enjoyed the various lessons that brethren have delivered, and I have been very hopeful that I would be able to come back to Bellview this year after I told Brother Michael that I would come down here. I've had to say no, and no, and no, and no. My wife said to me some year or 2 back, "You're going to have to learn to say no." And I said, "Well, now that's for the dope heads, and I'm not a dope head. As long as I can get about and put one foot in front of the other, I want to continue to preach." And you know, after preaching 60 years, it's pretty hard to hang up the sword. But I can still push a pen occasionally and do some writing. But there does come a time when you have to say no so far as moving about. I've been on lectureships all the way from California to Carolina and Pennsylvania to Pensacola and all in between, but those are days gone by forevermore. My subject this evening is the effects of liberalism in the home. Now, I cannot take the New Testament and open it up and give you a definition of liberalism. So far as I know, there is no explicit definition of this tactic of the devil so far as liberalism is concerned. But I know that Satan used a liberal viewpoint way back in the very beginning. And you and I need to understand that it is his purpose, his aim, to destroy every happy home that he can. Very early there was a woman who began to mess around with the devil, and wreck and ruin came to her home in Eden. And of course, every time a woman begins to mess around with the devil, she's in for poor sailing. The home will suffer undoubtedly. But you raise the question, what is liberalism? What is liberalism? Well, we have to come several centuries in order to find out where the term actually began. In 1789, the French Revolution occurred, and in the French Parliament there were those who sat on the left hand and those on the right hand. Those on the left hand had the idea that we're going to change everything. We're dissatisfied with the status quo. We want to remedy that. We want to rectify everything and get rid of the old, the tested, the tried, and the true. Those who sat to the right of the Speaker in Parliament were known as rightists. The word conserve or consarve, C-O-N-S-A-R-V-E, was applied to those on the right hand. And they were the individuals who wanted to maintain the status quo. They didn't want to get rid of that which was tested, that which was tried, and that which was true. Now, we've had in more recent days a group of brethren who have been called change agents. I read somewhere where some brother said that Brother William Woodson coined that word. Well, now he didn't. Lyle Schaller, some 40 years ago, wrote a whole series of books. And one of the books that he wrote was called The Change Agents. And I was writing with respect to the change agents long before William Woodson, Tom Holland, and other brethren out there at Lipscomb decided they'd jump on the bandwagon. And I say that respectfully. But I mean by that, if we had had more of the brethren in Nashville who have arisen and dealt with these change agents as they developed, we wouldn't have the mess in Nashville that we have today. So we have a lot of people all over the country who want to change things. They don't like the Bible as we've been accustomed to it. They don't like the worship service. We've got to change it. They don't like the preaching that we've been accustomed to for these many years. So we just change everything. And that appeals to a lot of people who really do not have much of a mind to start with. But as we think about liberalism, we're thinking about those attitudes, and it is an attitude, who are concerned about changing just about everything that we hold dear and sacred. I remember that Lyle Schaller, in one of his books, which he called The Change Agent, writing for the Methodist Church, was making a pitch for all of the Methodist preachers to jump on board and change the Methodist Church. And they've been pretty successful in doing that, really and truly. One of the popes back in 1910 issued a bull in which he deplored the attitude and the disposition of some of the priests to bring in what he called modern isms. Well, the old modernism just actually is a warmed over definition of liberalism. Old Brother Shrigley said many long years ago that modernism and liberalism is just pure infidelity. And that's what it is. The more I read and study about modernism, liberalism, the more I'm convinced that it's nothing more than just plain liberalism. When we think about liberalism, and I want us to get a foundation for this, we might go back in the Old Testament and read the example of old Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who caused Israel to sin. You remember Jeroboam became a king. He split the kingdom into the northern and southern kingdom. And he set up altars in the northern area and in the southern area. Instead of letting the people worship in Jerusalem, they could go where they wanted to go, and he changed the matter and made it convenient for those people. And we've been hit with that same attitude today. If you'll make it convenient for me, then that's where I'll cast my lot. And so Jeroboam did that very thing. He was a liberal. You remember reading in the Old Testament the example of David, who was bringing the ark. The Philistines had stolen the ark, of course, and they wanted to bring the ark back. So a new cart was constructed, and they put that ark on the new cart. And they were bringing it back, of course, all the way to Jerusalem. But one of those fellows reached forth and touched the ark, which he was not allowed to do, and he was stricken dead immediately. So we ought to be able to learn a few things, friends. You can't go beyond. That's liberalism. And you can't come short of that which Almighty God has spoken, and that's anti-ism. So we're afflicted today with various isms. I don't know of a greater ism to destroy the home, the church, locally or the church worldwide, than this thing that's called liberalism. I think one of the problems we're having today that contributes to this is what I would call some of the new versions. And you say, well, how in the world does that fit in? Well, if you just take the NIV, for example, you can take it, I don't want it, but you can read there a great amount of Calvinism. You just can't do anything. One fellow said, even if you are a liar, God makes you tell the lie. If you're a fornicator, God makes you to be that fornicator. Well, that, of course, is Calvinism. We had in our newspaper up in Nashville, Tennessee, an example of a Calvinistic preacher who, of course, believed in Calvinism. And he was reading from Romans chapter 8, and he taught one of the women in his church up there a great deal about our sinful nature. Romans chapter 8, of course, over and over and over and over talks about sinful nature. And so that woman believed in our sinful nature. On the inside of our body, we have a spiritual being, a spiritual nature. And what the Spirit does is not the problem with really the body. And what the body does, no problem of the Spirit. And so that woman believed that which that low-down preacher was teaching her. And they got down on the lake there and was engaged in adultery, fornication, you name it. And the Corps of Engineer Rangers caught them down there. Took them up to the judge and so on, and it was in the paper. She said, well, he convinced me that we weren't doing anything wrong. Well, now, if you're going to be a Calvinist, if you're going to teach that stuff and believe that stuff, I say that is a detriment to our home. Liberalism will destroy the home. I brought with me a article here out of the Nashville Tennessean. Here's a picture of a young lady. She doesn't look like a regular strumpet, but she's a school teacher. And they arrested her. This is all over the United States. I'm down in Mississippi. And my brother's preaching down there, and he said, "Why, we saw that thing on television about that young woman. Pamela Rogers is shown in custody after prosecutors say she violated terms of her probation after her conviction for having sex with a student." Now, she had already been convicted and arrested, of course, convicted on one case. And they put her on probation, and she didn't have sense enough to accept her probation, went right out and engaged in that sort of thing again. I think it's rather interesting, and I was reading from the Firm Foundation paper. You may have seen this. There are 50 cases, and I simply mention this to show you what liberalism will do for your home. Among the most well-known is the case of Deborah LaFave, a 26-year-old reading teacher in Florida, accused of having sex with a 14-year-old boy in her classroom. Amy Gale Lilly of Inverness, Florida, softball coach at LaCanna High School, charged with a lesbian relationship with a 15-year-old girl. Carol Flanagan of Boca Raton, Florida, music teacher, slept with an 11-year-old former student. And I'm just reading these from Florida. I don't intend to read all 50 of them, because you'd be vomiting by that time. Janelle Marie Bird, 24, accused of having a 2-year affair with a 15-year-old student from East Hill Christian School in Pensacola, Florida. Jamie Wallace, basketball coach, she's 28, in Tampa, Florida, charged with having an 18-month lesbian relationship with a student. Kelly DeLicky, 28, woman from St. Augustine, Florida, pleaded no contest to charges she had sex with a 13-year-old boy. And that's enough of that rot. But that just simply shows, now, these are all women. And if I had taken the time, I could have found a lot more among men, really. But Buster was just simply dealing with women in that issue, and I think he should at least bring up some things with respect to men. But isn't it a dirty, low-down shame that our school teachers, all of these are school teachers, will resort to that kind of conduct? But you know what? And you listen carefully. If you take my son or my daughter in this classroom and teach them that they're just little two-legged apes, just a blob of protoplasm in this room, and then bring them down here in this room and want to have sex with them, then why are you going to complain about it? Now, what's wrong with it? We're teaching them that they shouldn't believe in God, shouldn't believe in heaven, shouldn't believe in hell. They are not made in the image of God. They are not souls. They have no souls. So there's no such thing as right or wrong. And yet, we can really get hot under the collar and take these characters into the courthouse when they're engaged in this kind of conduct. Low morals is contributing to the destruction of the home. The feminist movement, which was in the papers some few years ago, has contributed a great deal to the disintegration and the destruction of the home. I'm reading here from a book and a statement in it made by Kate Millett. And you listen carefully to this. The care of children is infinitely better left to the best trained practitioners. Now, who are those best trained practitioners? Who trained them? Well, probably some wild-eyed goofball psychologist or psychiatrist. And even in the Psychiatric Association of America, they'll tell you that most of them need help. And I really believe they do. I was in the hospital not long ago. I think altogether about 60 days. And the doctor came in one day and I said, I'm just so tired of this place. I'm about ready to call old Kevorkian down here. You know old Kevorkian, he was that doctor up yonder in West Virginia who believed in euthanasia. Well, obviously I was just making a joke. And that fool thought I was sincere. And would you believe the next morning a psychiatrist came in to see me? Really? And she was a woman. I thought, well, she needs a psychiatrist herself, I guess, but bless her heart, she wanted to help me. So she sat down over there and she started asking me questions and this and this and this. I wasn't very much help to her. I let her know right quick I didn't need Kevorkian, But I thought that was really interesting. Who are these best trained practitioners who are better to care for our children? Then she moved on. That the family, as that term is presently understood, must go. You know anything about the feminist movement? These characters who tell you that they want to destroy the family? The family as we know it's got to go. Turn our children over to the best trained practitioners. They're already doing that in Sweden in some areas. And they're trying to get this carried on here. Jill Johnson said, feminism is lesbianism. When women don't rely on men to fulfill their sexual needs, they are finally free of masculine control. Now, can you believe that? And I underscored that expression, sexual needs. How in the world would a reprobate like that know anything about sexual needs? If she doesn't like men fulfilling sexual needs, and she admits that women have sexual needs, then how are they going to fulfill them? You're going to turn to a bunch of dogs or varmints of one kind or another? Friends, that just doesn't make good nonsense, but to me that's exactly what's happening in some areas of our country. The family certainly has been undergoing some problems. And Jimmy Carter, when he was president, said the American family is in trouble. Jimmy Carter ran all over the country, and his wife Rosalind Carter, trying their best to get the ERA passed. Jimmy Carter tried to bribe various congressmen and senators to get them to vote for the Equal Rights Amendment. And his wife went around all over making speeches in the interest of ERA. And Congress passed that, but thankfully the states refused to ratify it. They had a convention out in Houston, Texas, and this thing was shown on television. And here are all these signs up there of the lesbians as they were hopping and jumping and skipping and frolicking around. And some of the legislators saw that sordid behavior upon the part of those, and even that turned their stomachs against it. Let me just read the statement about that ERA, and I think it is apropos. And listen to this. It's very short, very brief. The equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. And doesn't that look harmless? I mean, that just looks so innocent, doesn't it? And these goofballs in Congress didn't have any more sense than to be suckered up by this kind of thing. And that's putting it mildly. The Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. Now, what did that brief article guarantee? Well, here are just a few things. The wife is on an equality with the husband. Whereas in days gone by, the husband would be forced to provide for his wife and children, but no longer. The husband could make certain that his wife supported her. She had to support the children. If she refused to support her husband and the children, she could appeal that thing. And the second part of that amendment, Congress had the power to enforce it. The second thing, though, with respect to that amendment, was homosexuality. The homosexuals had the right to marry each other. And that was guaranteed under this Equal Rights Amendment, which would destroy the home. And the homosexuals could adopt children. Another thing with respect to that, women who had been able to go into the labor force would have to engage in the same kind of difficult labor as men. My brother-in-law was a mechanic in the Air Force. He worked out in Wichita Falls, Texas. He told me one day, he said, I can't hardly do my work for having to stop what I'm doing and go over here and help this woman who will say, Bob, will you help me lift this thing? And another one will say, Bob, will you help me to lift this thing? And he said he had to spend a lot of time helping those ladies, which he had to do. But after this ERA thing came into existence, or if it should have, he didn't have to help them. They could just stand there and groan and grunt all they wanted to. But he didn't have to help them one bit. The women's colleges, which theoretically and historically had been in effect in America, and that's where some of the great educational institutions had existed. Every one of them would have to be destroyed, put down, and they had to become coeducational instead of just allowing the women to come in there. The wife would have to pay alimony to her husband when they divorced. A lot of husbands are like that, wouldn't they? Sorry, low down, good for nothing characters, mess around, and wouldn't keep up the family, and then they could make the wife pay them alimony. Say, preacher, I don't believe that. Well, I didn't tell you to believe it. I just tell you what it says. And then again, there's no right to privacy. You got to take down the signs back here which says men and women. That would be illegal. You all have to you all have to use the same restroom. No such thing as a men's restroom and a ladies' restroom. And then your youngsters can go in. I thought this rather interesting. Men do not have the wherewithal to bear children. How many of you men ever had a baby? Not a one. Well, the women say we want to have that same right. And in order to assure that we have that same right, we'll just have us an abortion. If we become pregnant, we're expecting a baby, we'll just have us an abortion. We'll have the same rights as all you men. I don't know whether you've heard about the latest craze that's happening here in our nation. But up in Nashville, Tennessee, every newspaper around and the television stations, they've just gone hog wild crazy over what is known as the Da Vinci Code. You say, preacher, why in the world did you bring that thing down here? Well, I'll tell you why I bring it down here. There have been over 40 million copies of this book sold. Plus, a movie has been made of it. When it was printed, or when it was written by Dan Brown, there was a lawsuit held. And Dan Brown sued a couple of characters who had written another book. They called theirs The Holy Blood and Holy Grail. And so these individuals engaged in a lawsuit. And a judge said this, and I took this out of the internet. The judge says that this lawsuit is nothing more than a collaborative exercise designed to maximize publicity for both books. Random House published both of these books. And you can say why that publishing house would do anything on earth, including this lawsuit, in order to publicize this before the public and sell a lot of books. The judge further said, some items clearly come from the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. I conclude that in the main, the majority of the central themes were drawn from the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail in a language sense. There are grounds that Mr. Brown copied language from the Holy Blood and Holy Grail. Now what do we call that, Michael? Plagiarism? Plagiarism, you better believe it. Dan Brown's wife was named Blythe Brown. The judge said Blythe Brown provided the material for a chapter in the Da Vinci Code with the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail in her hands. The major part of the writings of the lectures at a later stage have substantially come from the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. Well, now, preacher, you've not told us really anything much about that book. Well, just hold on for a minute, and I'll see if we can come up with something here. On page 399, the marriage of Jesus and Mary Magdalene is part of the historical record. Now, I never did know Jesus was married, and you didn't either, and Dan Brown didn't, and any other nincompoop knows it. And then again, if Jesus were not married, at least one of the Bible's Gospels would have mentioned it and offered some explanation for his unnatural state of bachelorhood. Well, friends, if he was married, don't you know some of the writers would have mentioned it? Well, certainly so. That's absurd. And then I notice another statement here. Dan Brown has one of his speakers to say, "This is St. Peter, the rock on which Jesus built his church." Well, now that's just not so. Some years ago, I had a discussion with a Catholic priest. And the very first statement he made in his affirmative was, "I reckon we all believe that the church was established on St. Peter." And the very first statement I rejoined was, "I reckon we all don't believe that." He assumed that which he had to prove. No, the church was not established on St. Peter, and the man doesn't live that can prove it. But then again, not only was Jesus married, but he was a father. Now, you didn't know that, did you? And you still don't know it. And that little girl that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had supposedly was named Sarah. This man who wrote this book was an ignoramus from day one. But 40 million people are buying the book and seeing the movie. And you think of the horrible, horrible consequences of this kind of rot when it's passed on to the American public. Well, there's some other things that I could mention about this. Presenting to the world thousands of ancient documents as scientific evidence that the New Testament is false testimony. That's why I wanted you to know what this book was about. Our ancient heritage and our very physiologists tell us sex is natural, and yet modern religion decries it as shameful, teaching us to fear our sexual desire as the hand of the devil. The church, in order to defend itself against the Magdalene power, perpetuated her image as a whore and buried evidence of Christ's marriage to her, thereby diffusing any potential claims that Christ had of surviving a bloodline. Well, excuse me for reading so much of that rot. Now then, the National Geographic magazine is going to publicize this thing quite a bit. If you take the National Geographic magazine, you find the next thing that they're going to come out with is the Judas Gospel. You know anything about the Judas Gospel? Well, they tell us that the Judas Gospel is a secret code. Jesus told Judas Iscariot in a secret manner, "I want you to kill me. You're going to be a hero instead of a traitor. We're going to make you a hero." Reader's Digest says they're going to publish the Judas Gospel, and they'll give us that. The things I've read here with respect to the Da Vinci Code is just about the same thing in the Judas Gospel. And brethren, I don't mean to impinge upon your good nature, but when you see these kind of things being scattered out over America, things which will help to destroy the American home, you and I can rest assured that the home is in for a terrible situation. This is liberalism. This is modernism. Back in the 1800s, the German modernists, the old German rationalists, infiltrated all of the universities over in Germany. And the American professors went over there and got their minds filled with rationalism. They came back over and infiltrated the universities here in America. And the brethren Went to those professors and they got contaminated. Did you know we lost every single one of the colleges back then? Alexander Campbell had established Bethany College, and it was turned over to the digressives. You go up there now and go in the student center and you can buy beer in the student center at Old Bethany College. The College of the Bible in Lexington, Kentucky, where Brother McGarvey taught so many years, that thing is run by the digressives now. Out in Texas, there was Adran College. The digressives took that over. We lost every single one of the schools and 6 out of every 7 congregations. Well, we eventually began to bounce back. But in more recent years, so many of our brethren have become liberals, change agents, modernists, you name it. And we have another fight on our hands. We've got to change the home. We've got to change the congregation. We've got to change the worldwide congregations. We're change agents for sure. But brethren, we need to stand for the truth. Brother Michael, do we extend the invitation? All right, thank you. We're going to sing a hymn of invitation. You know as well as I know that I've not presented matters from the New Testament per se. I couldn't turn to the New Testament really and read you a great deal about liberalism. I know they had problems back then. So many of the congregations did. But you and I can be, as the Apostle Paul, in the midst of all of those troubles and trials, he would say, "For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." And I'll tell you, I want that for my life. If you're not a Christian, would you become one this evening? This would be a wonderful, wonderful time to obey the gospel. If you come to believe the truth, turn from sin in genuine repentance. Make the good confession and be baptized into the body of Jesus Christ. Do that for the remission of your sins. If you're unfaithful, you need to be restored. Brother Brantley will lead us in a hymn, and we beg you to come if we can help you in any way. While we stand as we sing, please.